Welcome back. So, I wanted to talk about law in Islam. First, I want to remind you that unlike Christianity, which we often try and take our values and understand Islam through that lens, that Islam from the very beginning was not just a religion, it was a community, it was a city, it was a political, military power as well as a religion. Muhammad led a nation. And so the connection between law and the community and law and the faith is very, very different fundamentally. So, and again, without this idea of atonement or salvation, the focus then is on proper practice of the law. So, like Judaism in that sense, but applied in a very different way. So, I wanted to give you some terms. The Revelation, the Quran, and the Sunnah are understood as Sharia. This is Sharia is in many ways more of a much more like legal theory. When the commands of the Quran and the Sunnah, the Sharia together, are actually interpreted and put into legal codes, then they're called fiqh. So theory, then codified. So the Sharia. So there's no way you can implement Sharia law in this, well, in the sense that, oops, that's Q. In the sense that so you see these governments out in various states and local regions passing laws saying that they will not allow the implementation of Sharia law. Well, there really is no, it doesn't make sense even. It is what they're, what they're really talking about are the fiqhs. So, again, to just give you the terminology, the Sharia then is the path, the fiqh is the understanding. So the Sharia then is divine, right? This, the theory, is God given and it is absolute. But how you take that and codify it into a legal system, that is not. So within Islam, the different schools of thought are engaged in great debates about how to apply Sharia law. So the process of turning Sharia into fiqh. And I can spell. Okay, so I really want to make sure you understand that. Sharia is this huge category that includes all sorts of things in it. We'll talk about that. But it is not, for the most part, something that can be enforced like a legal code. Therefore, various schools of Islamic thought, historically and across time and place, have attempted to codify that law, and that is what we call fiqh. Fiqh is not God given, fiqh is human interpretation. So, move on. So, here's the first element of Sharia that's important to understand is that it includes more that Sharia, it may be to talk about it in terms of legal theory as opposed to codification, it includes both what we would call religious requirements and civil, what we call civil law and religious requirements. And so it's definitely not just civil law. So issues Sharia law, that which you can take from the Quran, is what it is that we believe. Who are we supposed to be? Right? Our character, our teaching, the wisdom. The Jews called it halakha and haggadah, but this is, I think, part of it. Actions. So also, this would be ritual behaviors and not at all something that you would codify. So most of the time when people in the West misunderstand Sharia law, they're really talking about this. And that is only one half of one category of Sharia law. So it just encompasses way more. So let's just sort of unpack Sharia for a little bit. So when we take even when we take the larger category of Sharia, what's in it? So these are the three categories. What is prescribed has a specific punishment. So there are rules in the Quran that are specific and applicable rules that come with punishments. Then there are rules that can be Sharia that can be they really need to be. So again, this is the issue of punishment. Rules even in fiqh that are not automatic but are left to a judge. And then the third category, tit for tat, is this idea. Basically, tit for tat is what we would think of as fines and monetary requirements, as opposed to imprisonment or something like that. So that's what they mean by tit for tat. You cost your action. You stole from me my phone, and my phone costs X amount of money, and so you're going to be fined enough to pay back for my phone, and etc. That kind of thing. So let's go back then to talk about the Had, because this is where we focus a lot in the external when we look at Islam from the outside. These are the things we sort of focus on. So there are things that are prescribed a specific punishment in the Quran. So unlawful sexual intercourse, which would be adultery, false accusation of unlawful sexual intercourse, wine drinking, theft, and then as a separate category, highway robbery. So these are the only things in the text that are actually specified as illegal in the Quran. But I want to make some clarifications here. To make an accusation of adultery, you need 4 witnesses under the Quran. Now, I want you to think about that. That's a very crowded room, right? So in these punishments then, and then of course an accusation of unlawful sexual intercourse, the false accusation is punishable. So you don't think that this is going to happen a lot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And there are individuals within and so here are the punishments, the traditional punishments: flogging, stoning, amputation, exile, execution. We've heard about these, except for some extreme examples, perhaps in ISIS regions. These punishments have not been used for a very, very long time. But also remember that Jesus encounters someone trying to stone a woman who was caught in adultery. So we have these sort of punishments in our own history as well. So to go back to what I was saying, this idea then to make these kinds of accusations, one has to have practically have full proof evidence. And there are many Islamic scholars who would also talk about leniency or mercy. That's an E. Based on the fact that the world is not an equal place. And so, the whole Jean Valjean being chased all of his life for stealing a loaf of bread kind of thing, that sort of absolute moral application of the law to an unreasonable amount, that's not Islam. Islam would say there are lots of reasons to offer people mercy. Only if the world were, where if all people were truly equal and given truly equal access to to life and the things of this life, can we really crack down hard on people. So there's a definite move towards leniency and mercy in even when there's this sense of there's specific punishments. And again, most of these do not take place anymore. So again, so the had, but we focus on this because that's in the laws. So, or it's Sharia. So these are the specific ones. Again, then most rules come under a judge's discretion with the allowance of a tit for tat sort of, which again is fines and monetary punishments as opposed to imprisonment, or some of these more severe ones. So today then, so how is Sharia law enacted? We have basically a couple categories. So we have classical Sharia systems where Islamic law and therefore the religious and the judicial system overlap in a very, very much, not maybe 100%, but a very high degree of influence. And so I've given you those states or countries there. So Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, all very interesting Islamic nations. Malaysia, which of course is in the Pacific, and Nigeria by state. So that's one of the issues that's been going on. If you've been following some of the issues going on in Nigeria over the past 5 or so years, Nigeria is the religious by state. So there are some very intensive states, Islamic states in Nigeria. ISIS has taken a hold in some of those states as well. So there's a whole issue of that going on. You may have heard about those young girls that were kidnapped about I don't remember how many years ago, and have disappeared. And most of them were married off to ISIS warriors. So anyway, but most Islamic countries, the most common is mixed Sharia systems. So basically, Sharia only covers family law, custody, divorce, marriage contracts, and things like that. And so these would be Algeria, Libya, Morocco, Somalia, Jordan. And then the secular courts, no religious influence over for what we would call civil law. Some of the more famous countries with no Sharia system at all, Turkey, Tunisia, Senegal, Azerbaijan. These are two, Tajikistan, former Soviet states, and Chad in North Africa. So, and also North Africa, and Turkey is Asia Minor. So there are then several countries that allow for Sharia family law courts within an essentially secular state: Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, India, Thailand, and England. So Sharia is a lot more complicated. I hope you get that sense of what Sharia is. That it's a much more complicated concept than we often gets thrown around when we talk about it, and that it is not an absolute, even in Islam, both in its interpretation and in its application. So again, here it is. What is a true demand of Islam versus a local tradition? And everything from, there's extreme physical punishments to whether what kind of clothing women should wear, are all part of this back and forth that Christianity has gone through over the centuries, and Islam is at the moment doing that in some of its more influential regions. And in the end, today you will not find the punishments, definitely you will not find the Islamic punishments used, except in some of these, again, ISIS states that have sort of reverted to, or I don't even want to say reverted, who have created a really distorted view of what it means to be Islamic. So there you go. a brief introduction to Islamic law.